So welcome to Honesty Lunch and Learn, the December program. We are featuring Rachel Coyle from How Things Work at the Statehouse to dig into the inside of the Ohio Statehouse, specifically how a bill becomes a law. My name is Cynthia Peoples, she, her pronouns. I am the founding director of Honesty for Ohio Education, and Honesty is a nonpartisan statewide coalition made up of nearly 70 organizational partners and diverse stakeholders across the state of Ohio and across the country, and thousands of students, educators, and families that all believe in an honest education. If you look over to the right of your screen, you can see just a handful of the incredible partners that we work shoulder to shoulder with every single day, protecting our education spaces. And we do that with three pillars: educating, advocating, and building community to ensure our schools are teaching honest education, are affirming all identities, cultures, and lived experiences, and most importantly, protecting the rights and safety of all students, families, and our hardworking educators. And we do this very important work at three critical access points to public education. That's at the State House, at the State Board of Education, and in our local schools being K-12 and higher ed. And we do that by providing programs just like this one: skill sharing events, news, action alerts, information, and local organizing, teaching communities how to rally together and how to mobilize one another around honest education and inclusive schools. Today's program, we're going to start by taking a deep dive into the state of Ohio education. I'll give a quick run through of what's going on in the circus that we know as the Ohio Statehouse, as well as just a few quick updates around the State Board of Education. And then we'll segue right into our program, which will be a great segue because I'm going to run through what's happening at the Statehouse, and then Rachel Coyle is going to help you process and synthesize all of the updates that I share. And then your opportunity to ask our expert in the room, Rachel Coyle, anything that you want to know about how a bill becomes a law and how you can engage your legislators to move legislation and policy that honors our students and families, and how to beat back those harmful, hateful bills. And then we'll round out with some important things that are coming up at the State House and at the State Board of Education. And then we've got a lot of great deep resources to help the ball moving when this program is over. A couple of housekeeping notes: the recording, the slide deck, and this great resource sheet that Rachel built out will all be uploaded to the Lunch and Learn event page, and Sam will continue to drop some great links into the chat for you, so you can head over there later this afternoon. All of this information will be there. And feel free to drop your questions into the chat as we're running through the program. Sam Shim is gonna help feed Rachel some of those questions, if not Rachel digging into the chat and answering herself. So this is an interactive, informal program where we want to learn more to do more for Ohio. Okay, so let's dig into the state of Ohio education. We always like to preface what's going on at the State House by centering our strategic plan for education. This is a 5-year plan that was created with diverse voices across the state of Ohio that, as you can see here, centers a whole child approach to education. We like reminding ourselves, our communities, and our legislators what Ohio should be focusing on in terms of a high quality, inclusive, honest education. And if you look at the whole child framework right here, you've got the student at the center, you've got the family, you've got community partnerships, and look at these gorgeous spokes that are completely wrapped around our student, our children, our future leaders. This is what we need to be prioritizing, and these are the policies that we need to be adopting in the Ohio State House. However, this is what we're fighting right now. This is what we've been fighting since the last General Assembly. This is what we're fighting across the country. There's been a national extremist agenda that has a lot of this hate and harm and even more that's been imported into state houses across the country. And certainly Ohio is no stranger to that. And just taking a look at the State House right now, we know that these policies, they're ultimately designed to disrupt, dismantle, and defund high-quality public education, and to really create this fear and flight out of public education spaces into privatized education, which we've seen with the universal voucher program. And what that actually does is it distracts us from being able to address the real education issues, systemic issues, and emerging issues that are facing our schools, our students, and our families, and perpetuating the othering, the discrimination, the dehumanization, and hate of our children. And we need to sit and sit in that these bills are designed to cause hate and the dehumanization of children. And taking a look at some of the bills over here that we're fighting, we highlighted in yellow here the ones that are actually moving and that are priority bills for us right now. Sadly, there are so many that we had to divide them topically so that we could get through all of them. And if you head over to our legislation tracker page on the Honesty website, you can get a full rundown of these bills and more. And we've got great landing pages that kind of break down what these bills actually do and what they mean and how you can get engaged. So let's jump over to the next page and I'll share what some of those yellow priority bills are. So first thing, we do have some scheduled hearings already. We're waiting for a handful of other committee agendas to be released today. Rachel's going to get into that and explain why that is. But what we do know is already scheduled for next week is the Senate Education Committee is scheduled to meet on Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and there will be hearing sponsor testimony for House Bill 8. House Bill 8 is a dangerous, disgusting bill that forces the outing of our LGBTQ plus students to their families. It requires educators, staff to contact these students' families and share any conversations or things that these students have privately shared with these educators or staff. And it also requires that educators notify parents of any quote unquote sexuality content that is going to be shared or used in any kind of instruction or education in the classroom. And if the parent doesn't want that sexuality content, which is code for anything around LGBTQ plus identities, the teacher is required to provide alternative material for that student and to that family. So essentially causing a don't say gay and censorship of LGBTQ plus issues. Also on Tuesday, Senate Bill 162 is having all testimony. Again, Rachel's going to go into this, is proponent, opponent, and interested party. Both Senate Bill 162 and Senate Bill 168 are calling for all testimony. 162 is a bill around academic intervention services. And then 168 is about reforming current K-12 education regulations, especially now that the former Ohio Department of Education has transferred over to the Department of Education and Workforce. So when you see this reforms education regulations, it's actually deregulating education, especially around certifications and qualifications for our educators. So it's really lowering the bar around the standards and the quality of teachers that can be in the room with our students, which we know we want highly qualified professionals in the room teaching our students. And then potential hearings. These are agendas that we're waiting for. We're waiting to hear about House Bill 171. This is a bill that we're in favor of and that we love. This is a bill that will be updating current Ohio K-12 social studies curricula to be more inclusive, multicultural, and really reflect the different identities, cultures, experiences, contributions of communities that already call Ohio home. There is a potential proponent hearing for December 12th. So what we're doing is asking everyone to get that proponent testimony ready. And to help you do that, there is a testimony workshop that is today, this evening at 6 o'clock. Sam's going to go ahead and drop the link for that registration. Another quick housekeeping note, everything that you see here in the slide deck that's in yellow is a hyperlink. So when you head over to the landing page, you download this slide deck, just know that you can click on anything in yellow and boom, it'll give you a deeper dive. And then also, we're waiting to hear if House Bill 68 is going to be scheduled for opponent hearing next week. Opponents, that's us. And this would be for us to voice our opposition and hate for this bill. This bill is the most extreme ban on gender-affirming care for minors and trans youth in sports across the country. This is not an award or a moniker that the state of Ohio needs or wants. We are quickly racing to the bottom by being the leader in the hate and harm targeted at our LGBTQ plus students. So as soon as we hear about this hearing, we will send that out in an alert. And then finally, we're also waiting to hear about a potential committee vote around Senate Bill 83, the Higher Education Destruction Act. We just had opponent and proponent hearings for this bill. This week, we had over 100 witnesses across the state of Ohio submit written testimony and go to the State House and give in-person testimony. It was a glorious turnout. And we heard some pretty harmful rhetoric from some of the proponent testimony, Holocaust denialism, and talking about that there is no implicit bias in medicine. Really harmful misinformation that is not grounded in truth or facts. Finally, we want to give you a quick update around some bills in the House that did pass. House Bill 214, which is a bill that forces politicized culture war issues into educator codes of conduct. That sadly did pass the House by a 64-30 vote on November 15th. House Bill 206, which allows superintendents and districts to create indefinite expulsion policies, which could potentially target already marginalized BIPOC students and students with disabilities, essentially racially profiling them and profiling students with behavioral health issues or behavioral health needs. This bill passed the House Primary and Secondary Education Committee on November 29th. And then lastly, Senate Bill 17, which forces 10 concepts of free market capitalism, a biased take on free market capitalism, into high school financial literacy standards. This bill passed the same committee, Primary and Secondary Ed Committee, on November 29th as well. And then quickly running through, staying at a state level at the State Board of Education. Our next state board meeting is Monday, December 11th. It's moved from a 2-day to a 1-day meeting. That is at the former Ohio Department of Education building, now the DO building. You can also watch this meeting live, or you can watch the archived version on the Ohio channel. Giving you a quick update on the state superintendent search. This is the timeline that was mapped out by Ray and Associates. Ray and Associates is the firm that the state board contracted with to lead the state superintendent search. The application portal was open and just a couple of weeks ago and closed not too long ago on November 26th. So now they have their long short list of potential candidates. On December 5th, Ray and Associates is scheduled to offer their top candidates to the state board members, and then the state board members will select their short list of who they want to conduct interviews with, and those interviews should happen at the next state board meeting on Monday. And from there, they may actually vote and appoint who the next state superintendent is. If they aren't able to do that at the next state board meeting, then they'll schedule another executive session on December 18th to do that vote and appoint our next state sup. We also want to call out, and thank you so much, Sam, for putting this on the slide. In the November state board meeting, this was so special. The state board members recognized 11 teachers of the year, the Ohio Teachers of the Year. 10 of those are district level. Each of our elected state board members represent 11 different districts across the state of Ohio, and each of them celebrated and recognized an outstanding educator from their district. And the Ohio overall, the Buckeye Teacher of the Year was Mark Lowry. He's a broadcast journalism teacher out of Gahanna Lincoln High School. State Board District 6. And like I said, 10 other finalists were honored. We did link the recording. I highly recommend that you watch this ceremony honoring these teachers. It will remind all of you why you're here in this session and why we need to continue to fight for our educators and for our students. The ceremony begins at 35. You can also learn more about the Ohio Teacher of the Year by heading over to this website, which Sam should be dropping into the chat as well. Department of Education state board members accept nominations from January through mid-April, and then there's a Teacher of the Year committee that goes through all of those nominations to end up with our top 11. So a lot of love to all of those teachers. Incredible, incredible people. Okay, and speaking of the Department of Education and Workforce, this was interesting. DO recently held its first bi-monthly public meeting. They held it in person at the Department of Education and Workforce building, and they also live streamed it, which is great. And what we did here is just kind of bulletize some of the big topics that were shared in this meeting. The meeting was facilitated by interim DO Director Jessica Voltellini. One of the things that she opened with, interestingly, are some updates and some information around the department's operations and the biennium budget. One of the things that she did say is that the permanent director of DO is scheduled for Senate confirmation. You may remember Governor DeWine recently appointed Steve Dakin, and boy, is that a big bowl of spaghetti. Steve Dakin used to be the vice president of the State Board of Education and was temporarily the state superintendent of Ohio. You can head to our website to learn more about that story. But Steve Dakin is scheduled to be confirmed by the Senate at that Senate education meeting that we just talked about on Tuesday. They also walked through what was going on with our universal voucher program and talked about the backlog of applications and the processing of those applications, because to date, over 90,000 applications have been submitted, but because there were so many, and the question is, why wouldn't they have anticipated this? They've only been able to process about 55,000. So they're talking about their IT needs, their backlog, the application process for the next school year, fiscal year 2025. That portal will open on February 1st of 2024. They also ran through literacy, early childhood education, science of reading, talking about early childhood education received upwards of $120 million in additional support over the biennium. They also talked about learning acceleration, workforce readiness, $200 million awarded towards workforce readiness, student wellness, and they also talked about how people could plug into these meetings. Jessica Voltellini made it very clear that they're trying to make these meetings as accessible and transparent as possible. So they walked through what the rules changing process was going to be for any of the Ohio administrative codes that will be changing. It doesn't involve stakeholder input, public testimony, engagement, sending in written comment, and then it will be up to the director of DO to onboard all of that feedback and ultimately issue the final decision around that rule, whether they're going to adopt it, amend it, or rescind it. The next bi-monthly meeting is scheduled for Thursday, January 18th. Again, that is live or in person. And you can learn more about the DO meetings on this link right here. Enough about me. Okay, so let's turn it over to the incredible, incredible person that you came to see here today. Rachel Coyle is going to break down the inside of the Ohio Statehouse and how these bills that we just spoke about ultimately become a law or don't become a law if you're living in the honesty ecosystem. Rachel Coyle is the founder of State Action Initiative and co-founder of How Things Work at the Ohio Statehouse. She has held multiple legislative, campaign, nonprofit, and public communications positions in the Buckeye State and in Washington, D.C. So you know you're in good hands with Rachel. The depth of knowledge is incredible. And she just recently launched her own business about, guess what? The State House. So I'm going to turn comms over to my friend, Rachel Coyle, and take it away, Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I love doing these trainings. Hey, everyone, I'm Rachel Coyle, and we are going to do an abbreviated version of How Things Work at the State House to talk you through how a bill becomes a law and how you can insert yourself into that process. All right, so basic introduction. Don't worry about memorizing everything we're going to show you. Cynthia has been incredible. She posted it up online. They're also going to be posting links in the chat and sending them out to you. So everything we talk about today, you will have access to. And also don't worry if you've never paid attention to the State House before, or if you are feeling overwhelmed trying to get involved at this level of government. That's very new, very common. And we gear these trainings toward folks who need that basic intro. So the first thing I like to do is give people an explanation of why they should care about state level government. There's so much going on in DC. Why do we need to focus again on a whole new branch? And the first thing I tell folks is that even if you are focused on Congress, on what's happening in Washington, you still have to care about state level government, because in Ohio and most states, they're the ones sending people to Congress. They're the ones drawing the lines that decide who gets to go to represent us in DC. So for example, the image that you're seeing at the bottom of your screen was the district for several years of a very controversial member of Congress from Ohio, Jim Jordan. You can see that it was drawn in a way that made it impossible for him to essentially be voted out. So even if he did things that his constituents did not like, it was very, very difficult, near impossible, to remove him from office because Ohio legislators had drawn a map that kept him safe. We called it the duck district. We called it the seahorse district. But it really is important to know who's at the state house, at the state legislature, because they are picking who goes to DC. And then another reason to pay attention to state level politics is that several years back, especially on the right side of the aisle, but folks on the left are starting to head that way too, people figured out that they don't actually need to pass a lot of bills through Congress, because they can pass the same bill through 30, 35, 45 state legislatures across the country and pretty much get their agenda passed that way, instead of getting it passed nationally, but they have the same impact. And there are entire organizations set up to do this. One of the most infamous ones is called ALEC, and they literally will write pieces of legislation. This organization in particular is conservative, and they will feed it to Republican legislators in state houses across the country. And then all of a sudden, you see the same bill passing in all these different states, and it starts to feel like maybe everyone feels that way about an issue. So they are literally moving the entire conversation around whole topics to the right. An example I give of an ALEC bill is Stand Your Ground, which is, as you all know now, because it's been in the news so much, a very extreme right gun legislation that started as an ALEC bill, and they started feeding it to different state legislatures. And before people even knew what was happening, different states were passing these laws. And all of a sudden, everyone thought, well, does everyone in my community support Stand Your Ground? And it really is, it is happening without pushback, and it changes the entire dynamic of conversations. And so while everyone's watching DC, we really should be watching what's happening in these very organized efforts around state legislatures. So one thing I like to start with is that you have a reminder that you have so much power at the state legislature level. Very few people contact their state legislators. We're trying to work on that, but it still means that very few people can make a lot of noise. It does not take very many folks contacting a state legislator to make them feel like the whole state is calling. It really doesn't take that many people showing up to testify to fill a room. So you have a ton of power. But it also means that if you don't use that power, a very small number of people who disagree with you can make those phone calls and show up to testify, and they can make a lot of noise and a huge impact. So we really have to use our power, because if we don't, someone else is going to. So quick intro, what we're going to cover today: State House basics. So just a few terms you need to know, that kind of thing. And then we'll talk mostly about how a bill becomes a law, how the process works, and what you can do to insert yourself into that process. I'll give you some resources, and again, those will be available to you online and in the chat, and give you some key bills to know, and then we'll do Q&A. So a few basic terms you need to know. The first one is General Assembly, or GA. It's the name for the legislature, but it also refers to the 2-year terms that the State House operates in. So any bill that gets introduced in the State House only has that 2-year window to pass through the entire process, get to the governor's desk, and be signed into law. If it doesn't pass in that 2-year window, no matter how far in the process it got, it will die at the end of the GA, the end of the term, and have to be reintroduced and start the whole process over again. So our current GA is January 1st, 2023, until the end of December of next year, 2024. So that leads us to the next term, which is lame duck. At the end of each General Assembly, at the end of each 2-year term, you have a period called lame duck, where every legislator in the State House is trying to pass every bill that they have introduced for the past 2 years into law all at the same time, because they know all their bills are about to die. And it is chaos. They know it's going to be chaos. And the majority party tends to save some of their most controversial bills for this time period, because they know that so much is happening that no one is going to be able to pay attention to everything and things will slip through. They also know that lame duck, as you'll see, tends to occur at a time when most people are exhausted by politics. Our next lame duck session is going to happen next November, right after the presidential election, and is also going to be happening in November, December, so holiday season. So they know that people are exhausted by politics. They just want to have their friends and family over. They don't want to think about anything else. And that is when we actually need to be paying some of the most close attention to the state legislature, because they might be trying to pass some of their most controversial things by the end of next year. And another term to know is session. So that's got 2 different meanings. One is it actually means the physical time when they are in the State House voting on bills, but it also refers to the time of year when the legislature is in session, in operation, because technically in Ohio, being a state legislator is a part-time job. So you will see there are months, often during the summer, where they are not, quote, in session. And so it refers to the times they're physically voting and the time of year. And next slide. All right, so a couple other things to know. One is another term you need to know in Ohio specifically is called supermajority. So Ohio, as you see, has a very interesting breakdown of state legislators, based a lot on the drawing of our maps. So we have a supermajority of one party that controls the state legislature. In Ohio, it's the Republican Party. And that means that essentially the Republican Party in Ohio can control the state without any checks or balances along the way. I tell people, I don't care which party you are, supermajorities of any party are bad for democracy, because it really means that if Governor DeWine, who is also a Republican, decides to veto a bill that is too far to the right, for example, the legislators have enough Republicans in both chambers, the House and Senate, that they can override that veto and force something into law all by themselves. So it really takes away that checks and balances system that we all learned about in school, where somebody can step in and tell them that something is too extreme or unpopular. And then I'll quickly go over, won't focus too much on this, but things you can do with a supermajority that Ohio Republicans can do right now. One thing they can do is most bills that they pass will go into effect after 90 days, but they can actually speed that up and force something to go into effect immediately. That is something that we've gotten a question on a few times. Like I said, they can override vetoes and they can speed up the process of making a bill into a law as well. So some things you should know about who is in the State House right now. We have the majority. So the Republican Party is led by Matt Huffman in the Senate, Jason Stevens in the House. And then the Democratic minority members are led by Nikki Antonio in the Senate and Allison Russo in the House. And then the next slide, I'll tell you about some fun drama we've got going on in leadership. So right now in Ohio, because again, there are so many Republicans in the legislature, there is actually a faction issue going on with infighting between 2 different branches of the Republican Party. The Jason Stevens branch, so he is the Speaker of the House, but he was actually elected by a coalition of Democrats and Republicans, more moderate Republicans together. And then Derek Marin, who is more aligned with Matt Huffman in the Senate, is the further right Republicans. And there is so much infighting going on between these 2 factions that it has actually led to the stoppage of bills, that bills being slowed down, bills being changed, priorities being changed. it really is important to know the dynamics, because we often have to use them in our advocacy to try and stop bills that we don't like or push bills forward that we do. So now we're going to talk about how a bill becomes a law in Ohio and what you can do about it. There's lots of ways that you can help pass bills or improve bills in Ohio. The first thing you need to know is how the process works, right? So step one, a bill is introduced, obviously. It can come from the House or the Senate. Sometimes it comes from both. It just depends on which legislators are interested in introducing that bill. And if they're introducing it in both the House and the Senate, it's just kind of a show of force to show that there is support in both chambers. And bills are numbered in order of introduction. So House Bill 1 is going to be the first bill that was introduced in the House at the beginning of that 2-year term, that General Assembly. And it's going to stay House Bill 1 all the way through that 2-year term, the General Assembly. So that means that even if House Bill 1 passes the House and goes over to the Senate, it's going to stay House Bill 1. So we know where it came from and we know what part of the process it is in. Next slide. So the next step, bill's been introduced, then it gets assigned to a committee. And the committees are based on categories or topics. So we have higher education committee, K-12 committee, there's health committees, different committees based on energy and environment, all of those, all the topics you could potentially care about. And one of the best things you can do as an advocate is make sure that you are signed up for committee notice lists. These are email lists where you will hear when a committee is meeting, what bills they're hearing, and what type of testimony they're accepting, and all the different rules for how to submit your comments from the public to that committee. So there, I'm going to show you here in the next couple slides how to sign up for committee notice lists, because this is how you know as early as the rest of us possibly can when bills you care about are starting to move. So this is legislature.ohio.gov, and we will send this to you as well. And you can see there's a committees tab, and you can click on House and Senate committees, look through all of them, find the ones that interest you, and then I'll show you how to sign up for the notice lists. So you'll see there, all the House committees are listed. They're listed alphabetically. You can search through and pick the ones that interest you, the topic areas that you are most excited about. And I'll click on Higher Education Committee. That is big right now in our world. And you can see there, the chair is always listed first. The chair is so important. They are the person who decides when a bill moves, if a bill moves in their committee, what the committee rules are. They're also the person that decides if the bill gets a vote, and the person that you send your testimony to if you're coming in to testify. So Tom Young is the chair of the Higher Education Committee. If you click on his face, you always click on their faces, it'll take you, next slide, it'll take you to a page with his bio, his information. But you can also see on the bottom left there is his contact information. So if you are contacting that office a lot, that committee a lot, you're going to need to know his phone number. And you can contact his office and ask to be placed on that committee notice list, and then you will start receiving those emails I talked about. Next slide. And then if you go back to the committee list on the House side, this is only a House feature, you can actually sign up for the mailing list online as well. And both the House and Senate will show you all the bills that they are currently hearing. So the House side, you can contact the chair directly, or you can do it online, ask to be on the mailing list. On the Senate side, got to contact the chair. All right, so you're on those notice lists. You know which bills are in the committees you care about. Now, the next step is supposed to be that your bill starts getting hearings. That doesn't always happen, especially for members of the minority party. A lot of times a bill will go to a committee and just sit there for 2 years and then die at the end of the 2-year term. So what we're hoping will happen for bills we care about is that they will begin getting these hearings. It's especially important to get a second hearing for your bill, because that means that we get to bring in proponents or supporters to talk about why the bill is needed. We get to bring in experts, we get to bring in professionals who work in the field, we get to bring in parents and students and people who would be personally impacted by the bill. So important. Our friends over at OPAL are trying to get a second hearing right now for a bill that would help diversify curriculum that's available, HB 171, for teachers to use more diverse curriculum with students. So one of the most important things that we can do as activists is actually contact the committee chair and demand more hearings for bills that we like, that we want to move forward. And sometimes they will actually hold hearings because enough people are contacting them. They just want us to stop, and so they'll give us hearings, which is still important because it means we get to bring in those people. We can have the press come. We can get stories written about the bill. It helps move the conversation forward, which is huge. Another thing we can do is ask them to stop bills that we don't like, which often ends up being what we do. So we can call the same person, the chair and the committee members, and ask them to stop bills we don't like. And a lot of times they will, because they want to wait until the bill stops getting public attention to move it forward. So slowing down bills is a huge part of this process. And yes, I'm saying call a lot, right? So it's not like calling Congress. Phone calls are actually the most valuable way that you can contact your state legislators. There's lots of ways to do it. Obviously, emails are great, letters are great, but calling is important because at the state house level, they are not entering your name or zip code or anything into a computer system like they do in DC. It's literally you talking to a staffer, and you want that staffer to remember how many people called that day about that bill. At the end of the day, you want the staffer to go to their boss and say, oh my God, I got nothing done today because everybody hates that higher education bill. That is huge. So you want to call, and you want to be nice because it's a staffer. They're underpaid, they're overworked, but there's also not very many of them. So each state rep only has one aide and each senator only has two. So if you call a lot, you're actually going to get the same person over and over again. If you build a relationship with that staffer, it can be very valuable. They can help you get meetings with their boss. They can give you inside info on bills you care about. They can even help you get bills written and introduced if that's something you're interested in. So it's very helpful to be nice to the staffer, just because, for lots of reasons, but also because building that relationship can be crucial. And also it's good to call because they will absolutely get your voicemails. There's only one phone line per legislative office. So you and the senators are calling each other on the same phone number. That means that they cannot just let their voicemail go full and ignore it. They have to listen to their messages. So I recommend calling your legislators, leaving a voicemail, and asking for a call back. Give your contact information. And it is shocking how often they or their staff will call you back because so few people that day actually left a phone number and asked for a return call. So you can actually get a call back from a legislator, even if they completely disagree with you, just because they are reaching out to their constituents. And so it's worth seeing if your legislators are the ones who will call you back. And so another thing people ask a lot is it okay to contact legislators at the state level who don't represent you? And it absolutely is. In Congress, when you call DC, a lot of times you give them your zip code and they're like, this person doesn't represent you, and you literally get cut off. That is not the case at the state house because so few people contact the state house that they are very used to getting phone calls from people outside the district, especially if you're calling a committee member about a bill you care about. So if you call the committee chair, you say, I'm calling about this bill in your committee, that is completely acceptable and appropriate and good to do. You can also call the Senate president, House Speaker. It is more effective, though. The most effective way to call is calling your own legislator, obviously. So if you do happen to be calling your own person, mention it. And that helps give you more credibility because they know that you could vote for them. So another thing I've mentioned several times is testifying in committee. These bills theoretically will be getting hearings and they will accept public testimony. The goal is to come and testify for or against them in person. Very helpful because it allows you to be up there in front of the committee members. You'll be on TV on the Ohio channel. Reporters can hear you and the legislators can ask you questions and you can get a good back and forth going. But if you can't testify in person, because we tend to make it difficult, they tend to have hearings at like 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesdays. And I can't tell you when the hearing is going to start or when it's going to end. I can only tell you when it's going to start. So if there are 4 bills that day and you're there for the 3rd bill, you could get there when the hearing starts and actually end up having to be there a couple hours. So it really is a time commitment. If you can get there in person, it's the best possible way to do it. But if you can't, we also allow written only testimony. And a large number of written only testimonies can be very helpful as well, because it shows the legislature just how many people support or oppose a bill. The testimony will also be available online, downloadable for people who are researching the bill. It'll be on little iPads that the legislators have in front of them in committee, so they do have the opportunity to read your testimony. I just can't promise you whether or not they will. So submitting testimony is so easy. I literally can put it in this one slide. So we should all be doing it all the time, because a lot of times, for many years, in fact, we at the State House, we got used to the idea that just a few of the lobbyists would be the ones testifying. And it actually is interesting and noticeable when a large group of Ohio citizens come in to testify against or for something. But the press will often write entire stories about that, because it is still an uncommon occurrence. So the whole process is you are on that committee notice list. So you've got that email that your committee is having a hearing, your bill's having a hearing. So you write your testimony. Then you email your testimony to the chair 24 hours in advance. So obviously those committee chairs are important. You send in your testimony if you're submitting it written only or in person. Doesn't matter. You always have to email it 24 hours in advance. And then you also send them a witness slip, which we have for you. You can also get them from the chair's office. Simple little form, just tells them like if you're a lobbyist and if you represent an organization, that kind of thing. And if you're submitting written only testimony, that's literally it. You have just officially entered your thoughts into the record by emailing them your testimony and your witness slip. And if you're testifying in person, all you got to do is show up. So a couple tips on what makes good testimony. One is you want to be short and sweet. Truly, the shorter, the better. A lot of times the committee chair will tell you that there are so many people there that they're going to limit everybody to like 3 minutes a person. So you might as well have your testimony be short. You also want to consider your audience. So because there is a supermajority of Republicans at the State House, there's going to be a supermajority of Republicans on every committee as well. So I always tell people to think of like the debate you're having at Thanksgiving dinner with your most conservative uncle, and that is often who your audience is. Obviously, it's your testimony. You can write whatever you want, but it does help to think through who is going to be listening to you and the kind of questions you might get. Another option that we have as Ohioans, which is relatively new, is that you can watch the committee hearings and Senate and House session live online on the Ohio channel. It's entirely free. You don't need a subscription or anything, ohiochannel.org. And the videos are archived so you can watch them later. And if you or someone you know comes in to testify, you can pull those clips and share them online. And it is it's very powerful to have this opportunity to watch what's happening in our State House, even though we can't physically be there. And that is a very new option for Ohioans. So we're very grateful just for public access sake that we have this. And in the next slide, you'll see just what it looks like. A lot of you probably watched Governor DeWine's COVID press conferences on ohiochannel.org. You can see the House and Senate session, and all the committees are there with the archive video of all their meetings. So once a bill, all of that was me talking about a committee process, because the committee process is huge. But once a bill passes out of committee, it then needs to receive a full floor vote. So if it was in a House committee, passes the House, it then needs a vote from the full House, every House member. And some bills will get through the committee and never actually get a floor vote, although that's more common for members of the minority party. And then once a bill gets a floor vote, it then goes over to the other chamber and has to do the whole process again. So it'll pass the House, go over to the Senate, and get a Senate committee assignment, go through the Senate, and then get to the governor and be signed into law. So technically, you could come in and testify for or against a bill twice, once in the House and once in the Senate. Now, here are several resources. Again, we'll send these to you. They're up online as well, thanks to Cynthia and Sam. But these are some things I want to highlight. This is ohiohouse.gov and ohiosenate.gov. Great way to look up. The news section is press releases that they have sent out on bills that they care about or are introducing. You can look up your individual members' You can read their bios. You can learn about all the different committees. It's very helpful, especially if you're going in to meet with a legislator, to know about them and their background and their interests before you head that meeting. And then this is another list that we will send you. These are just some of our absolutely incredible list of Ohio advocacy organizations. Many of them are partners of honesty. Many of them are nonprofits, nonpartisan organizations, and a lot are issue focused. So for example, if you are passionate about education, there's a whole list of organizations we could send you to. LGBTQ issues, a whole list of groups, really anything you care about. There are passionate organizations working on those issues that Honesty partners with them, many of them as well. All right, this is a big one. So this is how to find a bill that you are looking for at the State House, legislature.ohio.gov, which again, we will send you. And it is there, you go to the legislation tab and you click search legislation. And I'm going to show you how the search tool works and what it looks like when you find your bill. So this is legislature.ohio.gov, the search legislation tab. You can look up by bill number is probably the easiest way to do it. But if you don't know your bill number, you can look it up by the person. So if you have a legislator who you're interested in seeing what they care about, you can look up them and what bills they've introduced or co-sponsored. You can also look up all the bills in the House or all the bills in the Senate. I'm going to type into this tab SB 83 and show you a bill that is very important in our work right now. So this is Senate Bill 83. This is a bill page. Anytime you find your bill, it's going to show up looking like this. You can see who the person was that introduced it and who co-sponsored the bill there on the left. So this is Senate Bill 83. We refer in honesty to Senate Bill 83 as the Higher Education Destruction Act. It is truly one of the most dangerous bills that I have seen in education world in a long time. We are actively fighting against it with many of our amazing partners. And this bill is currently, it has passed the Ohio Senate and is now in the House, in House committee. We had many folks come in and testify against this bill last week, and we are waiting to see if it's going to be on the schedule next week. TBD, we should find out that very soon. But so I want to show you a couple features of the bill page. One is, this is the honesty page as well. Stop it with lots of resources on how to stop SB 83. You can join our sign-on letter. You can call legislators, email, lots of amazing flyers and things you can download to show you the dangers of this bill. So another thing I want to show you is the documents tab. This is less useful right now with this particular bill, but it's very helpful most of the time. The documents tab for a bill page will show you the most recent and all previous versions of the bill, the legislation text. But my favorite thing is the bill analysis. So if you click on that, it'll show you something that is bullet points, breakdown in plain English. You don't have to be a lawyer to read it, what the bill would do. And these are shareable, so you can show your friends and social media connections what this bill is and why you care about it without forcing them to read the entire text. It's less helpful with this particular bill because they seem to be introducing many new versions of this bill and not updating the bill page. But that is uncommon. They tend to do that sometimes when a bill is especially controversial. But it still is very helpful to have this breakdown of most of the bills that we are paying attention to. And I also want to show you quickly how to read a bill. If you do need to read the actual full text, there's a helpful trick. So this is, you see the legislation text, the bill, the one that's at the top is going to be the most recent version of the bill. So if you click on legislation text, I'll show you a quick trick. So this is what a bill looks like. It can be very overwhelming. This one you see is, this version at least was 93 pages long, very intimidating, but there's a trick to know that will help you read the bill the way that the staff and the legislators do, help you get through it quicker. So what happens with a bill is they will put the entire piece of the law that is connected to that bill into the bill for context. So for example, even if there's only a few lines that are actually going to change in the law if this bill were to pass, that's still, they could still give you 90 pages of context for that section of the law. So what you're looking, the plain language is existing law. You can kind of skim past it. The underlined text is what you're looking for. Those are words that they would be adding in if this bill were to pass and become law. And then crossed out text is words that they would be removing from Ohio law if the bill were to pass. So you can technically skim through a whole bill with just regular text and find those 1 or 2 or 3 pages oftentimes that are the actual underlined and crossed out words you need to care about. And then this is another resource. I'm not going to focus on it. Just want to give you to know that this is there, lsc.ohio.gov. So many incredible resources. These are the team of lawyers that are hired by the state to write our bills. They're also the ones who write the bill analyses I just praised earlier. They do so much around the budget. Go to lsc.ohio.gov and just be amazed. It's a fun website to play around with, especially around the budget season. That's what this is the budget tab. And then very, very quickly, because I want to get to a few questions, just a couple of the most controversial bills this year. This slide is here to show you how important it is to pay attention to the State House, because this is a joint resolution in Ohio that actually became issue 1 in August. So this was the legislators, the majority party were trying to pass this into an election that they held in August. And they were hoping that nobody would know any of this was happening. They were hoping that SJR2 would pass the State House, go to the ballot in August, and nobody would know, and they would be able to essentially kill our citizen ballot initiative process. But enough of us were paying attention that we were able to stop them. So issue 1 did not pass in August. And then this is a very stressful list of some of the many bills that we have been fighting against this year. A lot of these are very controversial, and you'll see a lot of the most controversial bills this year are focused around education and LGBTQ issues. That is purposeful because this year we had a lot of contentious school board races, and these types of bills create messaging and talking points for candidates for school boards. So there's a lot of this is strategized, but you can see several of the bills we've been fighting against, including some that are passed and we are now fighting in lawsuits, such as the state takeover of the Board of Education. But we also have a bill that we're concerned about, HB 68, which you heard Cynthia mention earlier, which is receiving hearings actively right now that would ban trans youth, gender affirming care, and trans youth from sports. We've got bills, HB 206 is also currently receiving hearings. It would allow students to be essentially suspended forever without indefinite, without the ability to come back being determined. And so there's a lot of our partners either fighting that bill altogether or helping to improve it and make it more targeted and narrow. There's lots and lots of bills that we are working on. You can see obviously SB 83 is right at the top of that list, and I'd be happy to answer questions about any of these. But don't ever want to leave you with that slide, because I also want to remind everyone of how much power we have at the State House level, even with a legislature that is run so heavily by a group of people who all tend to vote the same way on bills. We have had many, many activists involved wins over the last couple of years, including several that Honesty's been involved in. For example, there were three book ban bills moving last year, and I was sure at least one of them was going to pass, and none of the book ban bills passed last year. That is massive. That, saves K-12 education in Ohio. We also had several major attacks on trans youth last term, and none of those became law. Ohio has done lots of great criminal justice reforms with activist help, including last year, we banned life imprisonment without possibility of parole for children under 18, which is huge. We got first responders with PTSD. We make sure that they're able to get workers' comp so that you don't have to just have a physical injury to receive workers' comp. There have been several different citizen ballot initiative measures that would have gotten rid of our ability to collect signatures and put something on the ballot over the last several years, and we have killed each and every one of those to maintain that citizen power. So just so many things that you don't hear about in the news that are wins that make our state stronger, thanks to all of you and all of your activism. All right, so again, I'll send you all these, and they're putting them in the chat. But if you're interested in paying attention at the State House level, I've got social media everywhere. How Things Work at the State House on Facebook, How Things Work OH on Twitter, and I'm on TikTok as well, trying to make it really accessible for folks. We always focus on calls to action, so I'll give you phone numbers, I'll give you emails, I'll give you things to actually do to help impact bills that are moving through the State House. And then I have a few minutes left, and I'm happy to take questions from anyone who's interested.
Hey, Rachel, there's a question from the audience from William Franklin. He says that I often call reps and the governor, leave a message when no one answers, but I have never received any return phone calls. What can you say to these people to get their attention?
That is a great question. And unfortunately, yes, there are definitely legislators who will not contact people back. Some of the suggestions I make there is if they have a social media presence, especially on Twitter, because there's a lot of reporters on Twitter, they can get very uncomfortable when they see that people are asking them questions publicly. They may feel a more pressure to actually respond. So go talk to them on Twitter. But also trying to schedule a meeting with their office. Sometimes they will allow that more than they will actually answer phone calls. But unfortunately, there are still going to be legislators who just are not responsive. And that has to be where we go and do a public campaign to let people know that they're not responsive and that they need to be voted out.
Great. I think we are almost out of time.